Hi, I'm Greg Stewart, CEO of MMA Global, the international nonprofit trade association for CMOs who are focused on architecting a new future of marketing.
I'm Rex Briggs, an author, market researcher, measurement inventor, and entrepreneur.
Now, Rex, listen, you know that I'm absolutely obsessed with customers and sort of how marketers interact with them. And I think what's really most interesting to me is really how artificial intelligence AI is going to really impact the game for customers' journey, right? I mean, like, it's such a, it's funny. I feel like I keep talking to marketers about where we are and sort of understand that journey. And I feel like it's a little missing at some level at this point. So, but I think one of the most important things that marketers need to really know and understand is that, are there ways that they can save, a few hours on all the sort of drudgery, dare I say, of marketing, whether it be content or other areas. But I think that, efficiency has really been the popular one. I'm not sure that's where we really want to end up with this whole thing, though, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I've done a lot of research with on my own with you at MMA that's looking at the customer, their journeys, what they're doing. Initially when I wrote a book about 15 years ago, I said we shouldn't be using the purchase funnel because most funnels leak like a sieve. And instead, maybe a purchase highway because there's on-ramps and off-ramps. People move forward and backwards. There's a lot more dynamic motion there, but there wasn't really a language to do that. And we see this BCG report that Google worked with BCG to develop, and it kind of gives some new insights about how to think about the customer journey. And I know I, for one, am very excited about this conversation. How about you, Greg?
Yeah, no, 100%. And listen, they have two companies of this scale to really sort of put their minds or their brilliant minds to work to have to figure out some of these research and come up with, as I think consultancies do really well, new frameworks to really think about what a world looks like and how AI is impacting that consumer journey. So I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, so we've got Sadie Thoma. Should I do that again? Is that right? Close?
It's fine. It's close enough.
Sadie, well, tell me one more time.
Sadie Thoma.
Here. We've got Sadie Thoma from who's the director of US Ads Marketing at Google,
and we have Derek Rodenhausen. I'm just horrible with names today.
I know you started so wrong with it. Okay, wait. Let me see. Listen, I'm using.
You're going to be the intro guy, Greg. We'll be editing this section.
We have Rex usually pronounce things because I'm the really bad one most of the time. Okay, listen. So Rex, you're right. I mean, listen. Joining us today is Sadie Thoma. I got it right. Sadie Thoma, who's the director of U.S. Ads Marketing at Google, and Derek Rodenhausen, who's the managing director and partner at BCG Group, and actually kind of an old friend. We did some work together once before, so yeah, appreciate it.
Well, welcome. Thank you. So tell us about your research. You guys got together and did some really interesting work together.
Well, I'll just start by saying that it is such an incredibly exciting time for marketers right now. I keep saying this is our legacy moment as marketers to really lead the way, given the level of change and the opportunity that comes with AI and the possibilities that we can do things we just could not do before. So it's a really incredible time for our industry. There's been so much hype around AI. We know every conference, every meeting we're in, there's all this talk about AI this, AI that. But we need to, and we've started to move to more of a discussion around AI how, to really unpack what does it mean, how do we get started, what do we do, what are those who are really leading the way doing that I might not be doing yet. And so we discussed with BCG, how do we get together and do some research and thought leadership together to really understand what does the future of marketing look like when AI is helping us to power the way like it wasn't before. And I think like you said earlier, there's obviously efficiencies that a lot of folks are talking about now when it comes to AI. So it's taking me less time to do this, or I need less people to do that. But there's so much more opportunity than efficiencies to think about growth. And we really found that in this study is that there are new paths and ways that we can work now that are helping us to be more efficient, but more importantly, driving growth. And that's what marketers are always wanting to do. I think it all starts, though, with the consumer journey. And as we've been saying, there's almost this infinite journey. You were saying the on-ramp or the off-ramp, but every journey is different now. There's so many interesting consumer journeys and so many different ways that people are engaging with brands and with businesses. And so that was really a key element of the research, was understanding the modern day journey. So I don't know if Derek, if you want to talk about that.
Well, hey, listen, Rex, I do think I need to mention that Sadie did set up that any idiot can get into AI. She didn't mention specifically start a podcast, though, so I appreciate her leaving that out of the conversation as an exception that maybe somehow, no, whatever. Go ahead. Derek, Derek, why don't you go ahead and fill us in?
No, I love it. I mean, look, I think there's two things that are happening, which is on the one side, you talked about how the consumer journey is complex. It's getting more and more complex and more nuanced. The other side, though, is what can marketers actually do about it? And I think Rex, you were mentioning 15 years ago, we were talking about how the linear funnel no longer makes sense. And so that's not really a new concept that's a challenge. But for so long, it was kind of, as a marketer, you're a little bit hamstrung to what you can actually do about that, because you still have to make this creative. You still have to set up your campaign, and you didn't really have the tools at your disposal to personalize or curate every different touch point, because it just wasn't practical, and you're kind of held back. And so it wasn't maybe a lack of insight or trying, but it was a lack of tools that were at your disposal. Now you're seeing that, okay, not only has the consumer journey evolved, and we know there's all these different touch points, but we can actually treat that and be more nuanced about how we go really understand what drives influence and actually go and tackle those micro moments in a completely different way. So that, to me, is the big unlock of what's changing here and what's so exciting, and a lot of why we wanted to dig in and kind of rethink a little bit how to look at that.
So tell us more, because that's such an interesting concept. I mean, if you think about the way in which, as you said, marketers were perhaps hamstrung in the past, it's because they would really have to traffic a single ad into an environment. So if you were doing a broadcast or a video, you might say, oh, that has to be upper funnel because it's a broad influence mechanism. And when someone gets to search, that's when we'll show them the paid deal offer and how much money they can save. But what you're saying now is actually you have more flexibility thanks to AI, that if the dollar offer in the video will touch someone who's just about to make a decision, and in the lower funnel in the search, it's more about introducing the person to the brand, and you're trying to build up that. You can now mix and match those. Is that where you think AI takes us?
Yeah, and even I would say for different consumers or different segments or different types of consumers, that journey for them and what actually drives influence and how they would kind of want to experience that journey is going to be different. And that too is kind of something that we've been thinking about for a long time, right? Is that for somebody it may make sense that they just need to see the offer right at the beginning. That's all they need. That's just the way in which they shop. Their kind of restock mission, and they're just going to, go make that happen whenever they see the offer. For somebody else, they're kind of want to come in and experience the brand differently. They want to go through many different moments on that journey. And so we can actually tailor how we engage with different consumers and set up different kind of experiences for them. So that was part of the thinking around saying, okay, what really drives influence? And knowing that different people may be influenced in different ways on that journey, we could actually break that apart and treat different consumers in different ways.
And Derek and Sadie, this is a pretty big project too. I don't think we've even given context here to what you did. So maybe just take one step back and thousands of consumers. Just give what you were a little bit what you're going out to do, and then how big it was.
Yeah, well, perfect. Well, thanks set up for that. So it's when we set out to really understand what drives influence, but then on the other side, what can marketers do about it? We wanted to really get a truly global and deep understanding of that. And so one of the things that we did is we went out and did a survey of over 3,000 marketers in total across the globe in many different regions. And then on top of that, we spoke to dozens of marketers to really understand what's happening within their businesses and bring to life what we were seeing in the data with actual stories and case studies around it. And so all that was a fairly extensive kind of research effort to understand kind of what drives success for marketers. And what we want to really think through is, with all of the noise in the market around these changes, what is it that the best are doing, and then how can others kind of create a pathway to get there, and what does the step-by-step journey look like for them? And so that was kind of what the goal of the research was, and we partnered with Google to kind of bring that about and to and design what we called the path to AI excellence for marketers.
And Sadie, maybe tell us more about that path to AI excellence, and then I'd like to come back to Derek's point earlier and ask a little bit more about the mechanics. But yeah, Sadie, take us away.
Yeah, I mean, I think what was interesting is what we found out, I guess, a few different things, but I think the pathway itself became this notion of how do I as a marketer know where I am and where I need to go. So when we looked at this together, we also looked at it across different areas of marketing. So creative and content, media and personalization, measurement and insights, and people and process. So those are the four sort of paths that we outlined to say, if we're thinking as a marketer, those are the areas that I can pull the levers on to think about how and where I can drive and accelerate my ways of working and accelerate toward greater impact and growth. And so the research helped us to illuminate what do those four paths look like and what does it take to progress forward along each of them, so that then as a marketer I can also know where am I today and where do I need to try to get my team to go toward. I feel like as a marketer we often talk about like who's doing it great and who's doing a great job or who's seeing success here or there. So it's good to have a little bit of a common framework and a way to sort of look at this together to see what great looks like. So I think that pathway to excellence across those four tracks has been really valuable to talk about with other marketers and sort of do the assessment ourselves on where am I today and where should I get to tomorrow and what do I need to do to get there. And I think the most interesting thing that we also found was that people and process is such a critical layer of the forward momentum on AI. We've been saying rather than a CMO being a chief marketing officer, right now it's a change management officer, because there's so much change that needs to take place in the ways that we work and the teams that we build and how we operate in ways that we simply did not before. So people and process is a critical piece of this overall puzzle and path to excellence, because you need the right people around you on your team and beside you in the C-suite to be able to get it done.
Hey, Sadie, that's kind of an interesting point. I was actually going to ask you a completely different question to your last point there, which is this change management officer. Is that really maybe what the CMO needs to orient themselves to do? Stop thinking about creating ads, stop thinking about, MarTech and ad tech stack, stop thinking about data, stop thinking about other stuff and just focus on creating change for the environment. Can you go one more step on that?
Well, maybe even start off with the prize, because why bother unless there's some value in it? And your report said 60% better revenue growth compared to peers. I mean, that's a pretty big size, the prize. This is why you should change, right? But yeah,
exactly.
Build on that.
Yeah, I mean, from the research, we saw that marketers that were leading in AI were seeing 60% greater revenue growth than their peers. As marketers, that is what we're all striving to do, is show clear business growth from the work that we do. And so this research is showing that those who are leading the way and taking the steps to incorporate AI into their marketing process and into the work that they're doing, into the ways they're working with agencies, into the way they're thinking about their development process, into their team structures, that there's a variety of components that are enabling them to see that broader growth. When we say, a chief marketing officer is now a change management officer, that's not to say that that's getting rid of anything else they're doing. It's just to say that to progress in AI, you can't do it alone. None of us can do it alone. And so the only way we're going to be able to move forward is if we are working with the right partners, with the right people internally, with the right teams and with the right vision, so that people can understand, where am I heading? What am I doing? If I have to change the way I've been working for the past 20 years, tell me why and how. And there just is a change management component to this, that you can't just flick a switch and say, AI on, let's go. People need to figure out that this is different. It's a new tool in our toolbox. It's new solutions. It's new products, new ways to consider work that we maybe can not do as much of, so that we can have more time to free up to do the work we want to do and get back to marketing. So I think there's an interesting opportunity with that.
Well, that's where it ties back with the reporting about the change at the funnel, because I think in many ways marketing departments were organized around what needed to be done in the funnel. And so if you're saying that it's now actually you can't think of the funnel as an organizing principle anymore because people move in so many different ways, what is the organizing principle then that we should be building around? I know you have that kind of broken down. Here's how I think about measurement and these different pieces, but maybe you can give the listeners a good summary of how to begin to organize yourself.
Rex, hey Rex, just to clarify, do you mean like, is there a new operating model for marketing? Is that where that question goes?
Yeah, and you're certainly doing a lot of that research, Greg, with MMA, with the marketing organization models. And we've had one of the leaders of that, Omar, on the show earlier. But I'm thinking about right now. It's interesting if you think about. You oftentimes have performance marketing being a group that's thought of as being lower funnel activity. And then you have maybe brand thinking about the upper funnel activity. They're working the sponsorships. Right. They're actually having more fun than everybody else because they get to go to this PGA Tour and the NFL games. But they're putting together important sponsorships along the way. But Derek saying that doesn't apply anymore in the same way. And maybe that's not the right way to organize how we do things.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, Rex, this is still a journey in a lot of companies, and it really varies by industry. But we are seeing that become a lot more integrated in many organizations, and I think things around measurement and how to create a holistic kind of KPI architecture that looks across both of those from upper funnel to lower funnel, and to kind of have to think about total outcomes and total business impact across that holistic picture is kind of a new way of operating, and it is really complicated and really hard to do. But I think companies are more kind of willing to try to tackle that now than maybe they were in the past. So yeah, I do see that changing. And then even when you get into the execution part of it, starting to see more of this kind of cross-functional pod structure where you'd say, okay, this is actually going to incorporate multiple different teams, and we want to go try to achieve a particular campaign goal or strategy that's going to cut across the entire picture, and we're all going to go work together to pull that off, as opposed to, hey, we're just going to focus purely on a brand splash, or we're focusing purely on a performance outcome. We're going to actually think about the holistic picture and work kind of cross-functionally to achieve that. So just a different way of operating, which I think is pretty significant.
I'd also add that just to go back to the notion of consumer journeys and consumer paths, sorry, can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yeah, it's buffering a little bit there, but go ahead. Should be fine.
Oh, okay. I would just go back to the notion of consumer journeys and understanding consumers, because as marketers, again, we can structure ourselves in certain ways, but ultimately it has to do with what is my audience seeking, what do they want, what do they need, and how do I reach them in the moment where they're making a discovery or making a decision or whatever it might be. And so what we've found actually is that the modern consumer journey is, we've been calling it the 4 S's. It consists of streaming, scrolling, searching, and shopping. And so if we think about our audiences, at any moment, they could be in any of those stages. And by the way, oftentimes those overlap. Those are not individual. So we think about ourselves, you might be watching something streaming and you're on your phone scrolling. Or you might now take a photo of something and circle to search and shop for it. So there's a lot of, different behaviors, but across those different ways that people are behaving, they might be in a discovery moment in one and in a decision the next. And so AI is now playing a role to be able to and allow us to keep up with that speed of these infinite journeys, these unique journeys across what everyone's doing, again, these layered journeys. And so, in addition to making sure that we're thinking about brand and performance together, we shouldn't be thinking about those separate. We need to understand where our consumer is, and AI is a lever that can help us reach them when they're in those moments to figure out how to get in front and influence them in the right way at the right moment. And it's virtually impossible to do that manually now, just given consumer behavior has changed so much.
So let's talk about the mechanics of that, because it seems like with your 4 S's, the only thing that's left is maybe sleep and sex, and that covers 100% of what people do with their time. But if you go through the mechanics of how do you then stay in touch with what else somebody is doing, where they're in that streaming mode, and therefore what kind of engagement you want to have, does that suggest that every marketer needs to have a CDP that is in memory, keeping track of where they think the customer is on their buying propensities and be able to act on it? Does that become a critical ingredient to make any of this work, or is that not necessarily where every marketer will have to get to?
We've been talking, oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Derek.
No, I was going to say just that kind of is one of the big capabilities that we've talked about. We talked about actually 6 recs, and maybe we can dig into that one. But the first was just foundationally to have that integrated view of the customer. And, especially as you get with AI, that you have something to train on, something to model against. So it's not just about, connecting for the sake of it, but that's going to be just an imperative. As you think towards the future where things are going to go, it's going to be, the starting point. The second thing is that just much more testing and experimentation. That's just we've seen a lot of that happen already over the last many years, but I think you're going to see even more of that now. And then how do you integrate those results back into your kind of single view? The third is more just, okay, now we've got that. How can we be more dynamic in how we allocate and think about spend shifts and being a little bit more fluid so that it's not just like these annual cycles, but we're kind of doing that over time. And then fourth is just, okay, we've got all this, and now what is the creative? What are we going to actually say to people that's going to be more personalized? Then, fifth, creative gets like rapid generation developed with AI. And then the sixth is that we've got the teaming model that we talked about earlier is set up to actually be cross-functional to deliver that. So I think you're right. The starting point is the data, centralizing it. But if you just do that, that's not really going to get you very far. So it's going to have to be kind of this full spectrum of things, and we need to kind of work in concert, to pull this off.
And just to take one step even further is thinking about something like creative, to the point earlier, before it was back in the day, when I was starting off in the marketing advertising world, it was, you create a TV ad, a radio ad, an out-of-home ad, and and a print ad. It was like very basic. I think now it's just interesting as we think about these different behaviors between streaming, searching, scrolling, shopping. What are the creative assets you may need, and having more of a systems-based mindset even on the creative assets alone. It's like what is the toolbox and what is the sandbox that you need, so that as you're thinking about different formats, you're thinking about going after and moving at the pace of the consumer, you've got work and you've got messaging that can move into whichever space they may be at that moment, and it makes sense together.
That's such a powerful point. I have to share a story because it just happened today. Greg knows about this because we've been working with one of the global CMOs on this. There was an insight from the AI for one of these campaigns we were measuring that the truck that they were showing was pulling an Airstream, which appealed to the affluent people, but it was sort of missing people that had more of a rural skew. We could see that in the data, and the AI had sort of revealed that. And the AI even gave suggestions of what a rural person would want to see towed, more of an everyday family camper or equipment or a livestock trailer. And so we looked to see what assets they had to do that, because they weren't going to use a Gen AI image, even though that was good for inspiration and storyboarding. And they didn't have the assets. They had a couple of them, and they'll put them into rotation, but the gap was, wow, okay. So you raise such a fascinating point, which is that people need to completely think about their asset management and what they're developing entirely differently. How would you suggest people do that? Or what's the big unlock that gives people this bigger amount of content that they can then tap into and use as they need it?
Well, I think that I actually think it's interesting. What you just cited was an example of a brand who didn't want to create something new with Gen AI, didn't want to create a new image. So there's two ways to do it, because one way would be to leverage some of the tools and the technology now where you can actually create things versus going out on a shoot to shoot everything and flying around the world for these, you don't have to do that anymore. So,
yeah, fair point.
That I think that's one of the things that I would say most marketers and a lot of creatives are excited about, is the fact that now I have an idea in my head, or maybe I got information from the audience, and I can now get it onto the screen as quickly as possible. I don't have to wait months to do it. I don't have to do a pre-pro, all these steps to get there. So I think that is one route, is to think about how to use text to image, text to video to create certain results quickly.
Yeah.
But you really need a custom model for that to do really good with your own
Yeah.
product, right? And
I was
that's
gonna
where,
say-
I mean, I guess, hey, call it Google or a few of the other people that can do it. But it does seem like
there's-
you need that, right?
I mean, you do, and a lot of the agencies are working with that now. I mean, there's a lot
sure.
of great solutions now that are quite extraordinary. But I'm not saying that's the only way. I think the other way is to honestly think about more of that systems approach. So think about the different audience personas you have. What might be different imagery that might make sense for each of those? How do we make sure we're getting all of that up front, understanding different formats between video, between static, between words, like what is the library we may need? And then as you start to run the work and you get feedback and get data back on what's working, what's not, you can start to adjust and pull from your library. That's if you want to create it all up front on your own, but it's just a different way of thinking versus previously where it was like, I need 3 banners like this, I need this like this. It's more of the, again, systems orientation versus list out each individual piece.
Yeah, and I might challenge the not using Gen AI created content, Rex, in terms of where things are headed, because I've seen that already move so fast in the last months. We started with copywriting, and even when we were doing this report at the time, it's 5x faster with copywriting. That's kind of one use case. And you start to get into image creation, and now with Veo 2 and others, I mean that's Google's solution. The video assets that are being developed are so incredible, and we're talking about days of from you start with. Maybe create the storyboard, like you said, and we're going to start there. We'll do some iterations. So it's not just one click, but it is if you spend days working through that, you can actually get to a usable video asset, and then you can test it and maybe, try some smaller buys where you're actually experimenting, getting some feedback on that, as opposed to, hey, we're doing a brand planning where we're going to have a creative shoot, and it's going to be months before that is all developed and ready to test. And so I think that is one of the most exciting areas in general in marketing, is just the speed on creative and the ability to get kind of market feedback on that asset so much faster. So that's where we're spending a lot of time.
I still think that's a little challenging. I've seen research from a team of professors I was with a couple of weeks ago, and they were showing that when you used most images still look like they were AI generated. Okay, so you're right. We have to cross that chasm.
Yeah.
Maybe people think we're there. I don't know. I've seen it for sure. But they did a series of consumer feedback with AI, and there was a big diminishment in the brand dynamics when the consumer could tell it was AI. So I don't know where we are.
You have to cross the uncanny valley, basically.
Yeah, I mean,
for
script
right now we're already there with email, with audio,
Easy.
because
Easy.
synthetic voices are phenomenal. Google's work has been mind-blowingly good, as a few others. But I think the video one, and it's just moving the frontier. And I think you're right, Derek, to point out whatever you're saying today, by the time this thing airs, or maybe a few weeks later, maybe it's already solved.
Exactly. Yeah.
We're saying whatever we see today whatever we see today is going to be the worst it's ever been. So, and if you check out, VO2, it's pretty incredible. So in terms of text to video. And same with Imogen. So I feel like there's been major strides. I agree with you maybe a few months ago, some of it out there does look very computer generated, but there's a lot now that looks really great. And again, I think thinking about what's right for your brand or thinking about what's right for the idea that you have. So to the point about the Airstream, if you can create and generate a different toe rather than the Airstream, you're not using a person, you're not using this or that. Maybe that's more comfort zone for that particular brand or advertiser, because that's an easier solve to do quickly. But again, there's marketers that are leading the way on this, and that's, I think, part of this research is interesting to say that there's marketers that are willing to try and willing to do things that haven't been done before to see how we can learn and move faster from pilots into programs. And that's what we need to just all start doing. And I just think the other consideration is just, I said this before, but it's not up to any one of us either. It's like, how do we come together and figure out how we can join hands and say, let's try to walk this walk forward together, because we can't wait for the next person. And if we wait, we're going to be left behind. Right. So for any companies that are thinking about, who's my AI person? That's not the way to think about it. Everyone should be coming should be able to become entrenched in this and just play around with it. And so you can see, actually, this video quality actually is pretty amazing. I was using it yesterday. So how do we all start to just get our hands dirty and thinking about and exploring all different solutions? Because I think that things are moving at such a rapid pace. There is a lot of exciting potential that might be easier to jump in if you've been doing it yourself and you've been seeing the results.
Hey, Sadie, a good question out of that then too. So you and your team have had exposure to the research now. Do you have a sense of what changes you either most want to make or focus on based on having seen some of this? Like that might be guidance to others about what would be important to them. Maybe you've said that, but just maybe crystallize that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so the research was super valuable for us to just think through how and really interrogate how are we working ourselves, and are we taking these steps to make sure that we're integrating through all that we do. So it's been a great, I think, again, framework for us to think about how and where we are in the process and how do we want to move forward. We actually, within Google Marketing, launched a new group called M.AI Lab. It's within the marketing organization, and their focus is how do we ensure that we're thinking about AI through the entire Google marketing organization. And so they're like a center of excellence that's helping the entire org move forward in a lot of these areas. And we're doing a ton of experiments. We're doing a ton of just sharing and learning across the organization. And there's things that we've developed that are almost like little snippets that get sent around each week on here's a new tool, here's how to use it. And again, it's just helping everyone kind of be more entrenched in what's available and how can I think about using it. So one example I'll give also for my own team is that we do work with CMOs. And so in other words, marketing to marketers. And we said, why don't we put together a CMO agent, almost like a persona, so that we could interact with that CMO persona as we're thinking about messaging or thinking about ways to engage. And it's just, we put a lot of research that we had done into the tool to help train up, this audience member, and we're playing around with it. And it's something that's interesting. Whereas in the past, of course, we would have done focus groups or we could have done like big quant studies. But it's interesting when you can kind of have a chat with someone who's your customer, your audience, and just see how that works. So that's just one example, but we're trying to embed that thinking and that approach into everything we do. And I think the framework and a lot of the learnings from the BCG study have been really valuable as we, continue to rethink how we operate every day.
Yeah,
Sadie, I love that you're using these
ask
synthetic
a CMO.
personas, and you're basically letting yourself talk to your own data because you're feeding it with the context of all your focus groups and your surveys and things like that. So that's just such a great use. And that really was the same way with the auto. Once we understood there was a rural segment, it was talking to the segment. Well, what would you be towing with your truck? And it showed us.
Exactly.
It's just such a powerful way of operating. But here's a question to Derek. How do we really know all this work, all this change, how does a marketer really know it's worth the time and energy that AI is going to pay off? I think you guys' research has probably done more to tell us why that might be the case and give proof points. But what are some of those proof points?
Well, so you talked about at the beginning that at an overall level, we are seeing a disproportionate business impact from those who are leaders versus those who are kind of earlier in the journey. And you mentioned the 60% higher relative revenue relative to their peers. I mean, that's kind of an anchor stat. But then we are seeing, in each of these different layers that Sadie talked through with measurement, creative, media, personalization, there's specific examples of things that are happening there. For example, in creative, we talked about, that's companies are being able to execute 4 times faster. And so if you play that through into all of the costs associated with that, there's real business impact there. I mean, if you talk about, personalization and some of the impact that we're seeing on the messaging and the performance of that, it's not purely an efficiency thing, but it's actually driving effectiveness. So I think the macro stats are one thing, but I really think for each organization, it's setting up tests to be able to prove the value as you go. So you're not just building for some theoretical future, but you're saying, okay, here's our roadmap. We know what are the things that we want to prioritize. And then we've got a plan to get started and start to actually prove out against each of those what it means to us. And so that was part of like the goal of setting up this Path to AI Excellence is to help companies kind of design what their own strategy or their own kind of AI roadmap looks like, and then what do they need to do to start to move the company along. So that's how I might think about it. If I were CMO right now, is that this is going to, I'm going to see stats, I'm going to see other things, but I really need to just get started in proving it out within my organization and make those business impact real for us.
What are maybe we're going to run out of time here soon. What are some of the best examples of opportunity you've seen, Derek, either from sort of the other sort of your clients or within the research? And Sadie, I'm going to ask you the same thing. Like if you were, I realize we're looking at an overall holistic thing, so I want to be a little careful about that question. But like, give discrete use cases that say
bring it
you
to
want
life.
to focus here. Yeah.
Bring it to life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll just point to a couple, and Sadie, you can build on it. But one that I like a lot is just you talked, Rex, about the importance of stitching together, and whether it's a CDP, all the different touch points. And I think about there's a financial institution that we had talked to and worked with, and one of the things that they needed to do was to try to figure out how to integrate call logs. All of the touch point data across the journey with all their media data, and be able to kind of holistically pull that together to be able to design offers that were much more effective for their consumers. So we saw that financial services company, their offer launches ended up being kind of much faster. They were getting 60% faster in terms of how they were getting those out the door and being able to test and try different things. If I take an example of just the LTV audiences and being able to model better of who we're targeting and how we're understanding what the true value is. That's not just purely a B2C thing, but in a B2B tech company that we had interviewed as part of this, they were building AI models to really kind of predict the LTV dynamics of their audiences. We were seeing them get 25% improvement in cost per lead. Things around just being able to orchestrate that into what they're doing. But the ones that I get really excited about is a lot of what we talked about through this call, which is the creative, reimagining the entire content supply chain, the entire creative production process. And, we're seeing, this is one example just to have for you, which is a company that was able to reduce the entire creative development process cost and their speed to get creative out by 75%. So we're seeing creative production that's just happening in 1/4 of the time. And so, for some brands that are going to have a little bit of a different dynamic where they really want to have, the annual Super Bowl ad, et cetera, you're not going to be, that still is a time-consuming task. But many of the other types of creative that they're doing, they're just seeing, that be executed a lot more quickly. So those are a few that come to mind. But Sadie, I don't know if there's others that you'd want to add in.
I'll share one that I love, and it is about creative, but I think it brings to life this notion that there were things that simply were not possible before AI. And we, as part of my team, we actually have this program, we call it the Google Lighthouse program. And last year, we went to several agencies and said, if you could put Gemini and Google AI into your entire creative development process, what would that look like? And we want to task you with creating an impossible ad, an ad that simply was not possible before this technology existed. So there was one agency, Tombras, that came up with this incredible campaign for pods. Everyone knows what pods are. That's the moving truck that also can be a storage truck. So they used Vertex AI and Gemini and basically created a custom API. And they did this notion of a moving billboard. So they used a pods truck. It went around New York City, and it used all this real-time data on the weather, the time of day, the location specifically as to where it was within the 5 boroughs. And basically it took them 12 days from when they kicked off creative development to create the world's smartest billboard, as they called it. In 29 hours, the truck went into 299 neighborhoods across the 5 boroughs. Their website sessions were up 60%. In terms of quotes, they were up 33% in the New York City area, which was the biggest year-over-year lift they've had in 4 years. Wow. So that's a clear example of you simply could not do something like that before. but they took creativity and these clever, real-time, relevant messages to drive not only buzz around the brand, but also clear business results. And now they've created their own sort of like AI suite within the agency to do this type of work for other clients too. But I love that example because it's very telegraphic and understanding, how can you take a new tool and create messaging and impact like you just could not do before. And that's what's so exciting. And when we showed that work originally, we partnered with Thoma to bring that to life. We showed it last year in Cannes. I had someone come up to me, a COO come up to me and say, I think I've just seen the future of marketing.
Yeah, well, send
that's
us the
the
link so
type
we can
of-
include it in the show notes, because I
Yeah.
think that would
Sure.
be one that
I love
listeners
that.
would want to
And I
check
think
out.
that's where, when you can see it, when you can actually see
That's
the
right.
output, we can talk about it all day, but when you actually see the work and you see the outcome and you
Great.
see the results, that's what's really powerful.
I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know we are. We really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for both joining us. And that's it for this episode of Decoding AI for Marketing. I'm Rex Briggs. Be sure to catch all our episodes, plus subscribe, follow, rate, and review in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Or check us out on YouTube. You can get transcripts and more information on our website, decodingaiformarketing.com. And to learn more about MMA and membership options, go to MMAglobal.com. Thanks for listening.